Yo, what's up, Star Warpers? If you can't tell, this is a little bit of a different video than I was even planning to do on this channel. This is unscripted. This is unscripted. And I usually don't like doing these introduction sequences, but since this is a new kind of video for me and new kind of video for the channel, it's like, hey, well, why not? Just this once. So TLDR, that next video is taking way more time than I'd like to admit. And I didn't want to keep you guys waiting. I didn't like the idea of having a channel that released videos with long gaps of time between each one. So I was like, okay, how do I make videos? Because usually I write scripts and that takes a little bit of time. And then it hit me. See, when I'm writing these scripts, there are a lot of stuff that I just can't cover that I want to squeeze in, but I can't. If you're one of the people that review my scripts before I voice them out, you know what I'm talking about. But a lot of the time I just go on tangents and I just go on and on and on and on. And usually these tangents are something that I really want to squeeze into the video, but sometimes they're just a little too far removed from that main topic, so I just have to scrap it. So I was like, you know what? It would be a great idea if I just do unscripted videos where I talk about these smaller ideas that can't quite fit in those bigger scripted videos. And you know what? It's gonna help both of us. It's gonna help me talk without a script. And it's also gonna help me just get my ideas running in my head by talking about more of the stuff. And it's also gonna help you because it's gonna help you, know how I think a little bit more. It's gonna help you know how much you like this channel. If you really vibe with these unscripted videos, then you're gonna love my scripted videos. Let's get started. So, if you couldn't tell by whatever title I decided to give this video, today's episode is going to be about the design of Kirby's world, since I feel like that's a very important part of the series that we should talk about more. Even if we already talked about it already, we need to talk about it more because it's just so good. Today we're going to be focusing on 3 games: Kirby's Dreamland, Kirby's Adventure, and Kirby Superstar. And I'll get into why those games specifically later. Don't worry, we'll talk about more in more future videos, but for now, give me a break, okay? So first, let's start with Kirby's Dreamland. First of all, I just want to give everyone a reminder that this is a Game Boy game. Just real quick, let's pull up Mario Land just for a comparison. Yeah, pretty night and day. So yeah, really impressive for a Game Boy game. You can tell that when they made Kirby's world, they really wanted to make this surreal kind of land where, there are some ideas and some concepts that we recognize. Like, let's look at Green Greens. We're standing on a grass field, and on these platforms, we can see that there are flowers on the side, These are all things that we can recognize in our own world. But then you look at the background, and then things start to get a little weird. You see these weird looking mountain things. What exactly is going on with them? Then you see these things stuck to the ground. Apparently they're called Borbons and they're like in every Kirby game, but yeah, it's weird. It's unnatural, or at least unnatural to us. For this world, it seems completely normal, which is what adds to that fantasy element. And that's something I want to touch on, how natural this feels for this world. So let's go through the stages of Kirby's Dreamland and see how the world progresses and how the environments link up with each other to make that cohesive world. So first, like I mentioned, we start off in this plains fields kind of area where there are flowers on the side, these these weird looking mountain things, and those Borbons. And as we continue, we hitch a ride on a warp star and fly all the way to that forest we see in the distance. Then we progress through this forest, and it still has that energy to it. There are ideas and stuff that we recognize in our own world, but then there are weird things going on, like these Borbons and some weird looking enemies. Then we climb up this hollowed out tree, and it's, again, this is something that we can recognize in our own world. But you're not just gonna go out in the wild and find this massive tree hollowed out for you to climb up through and explore. Then we finish off the stage with a fight against Wispy. And I kind of want to just talk about that journey, right? We go from the plains to the field. We hitch a ride on a warp star and fly all the way back into the distance to a forest, where we then climb up a hollow tree, then climb down a tree, and then fight a tree. There's a journey going on here, which I really like. And this is the kind of philosophy that they follow when they're making a lot of Kirby stages. They want it to feel like an adventure, like you're progressing through an area. Let's look at Float Islands, because they do a similar thing here. We start off on the islands with palm trees, and as we progress further and further and we're flying across the waters to get from island to island, we reach a cave. And after we progress through that cave, we come out the other end and jump on a ship. Then in that ship, we find a warp star, hitch a ride, and I'm assuming what's going on here is Kirby's mistaking a whale for an entire island, which I think is fun, and it shoots him up into the clouds, where we fight Kabula. And what do you know? The next stage is bubbly clouds, right? There's an effort to link everything together, which I feel like you don't really see that in a lot of other platformers. And even in those other platformers where they have more detailed like world maps and more detailed locations, you're not going to see them have you go on a journey within the level. Usually that one level is, okay, this level looks like this, and it's like that for the whole level. For Kirby, it's just switching up every second, every room. And I feel like, you know, we should talk about that a little bit more, how cool that is. I will say though, it makes sense for this game because this game is literally 4 stages long. 4 or 5 stages, one of them's a boss rush, but you know what I mean. So they had to do a little bit more than just slap a bunch of assets together. You know, they had to really make those 4 levels worth their while, which they did. And I also want to briefly talk about the other stages too, because Flow Islands and Green Greens, they're these very natural environments. And you know, like I said, they have weird stuff going on, but that's only because it's weird to us. To this world, stuff like this feels completely normal. But then we reach areas like Castle Lololo or Castle Dedede and Bubbly Clouds, where there are some natural elements in there, like clouds and mountains, but within them we see these massive structures that aren't naturally occurring, but they were built. For now, I'm just going to say that they add some really nice variety to Kirby's Dreamland and its level palettes, you know, natural environments and then constructed areas, which I really like. I'll touch more on it later, but that's all I'm going to say about it for now. And yeah, as you can see, Kirby's Dreamland does a really good job of establishing what exactly Kirby's world is. It's a fantasy world. Some fantasy elements and some more realistic elements, and I really like that mix. And as you're gonna see in Adventure, they were just like, okay, we've established it, now let's do more and more and more. And this was kind of just a theme in the series, to be honest. And it extends in multiple areas like gameplay, copy abilities, ways to play, you know, stuff like that. But it also does this in the world design. And as we see in Kirby's Adventure, they really just wanted to expand what Kirby's world is. Like its namesake, they wanted to make it feel like an adventure. And first off, now that we're on more powerful hardware, the team, it almost feels like the team wants to show off. So they're taking some of these old ideas and just bringing them to this new technology and making them look, just look amazing. The first area of Vegetable Valley is kind of an expansion on the ideas that we saw in Green Greens. We still have those grassy plains and those flowers adorning the side of them, and when we look in the background, we see that similar mountain-looking structure, but this time it's submerged in water. And we look even further into the background, and when the lake ends, there's even more plains. This world is huge, and I really like how they're trying to communicate that to us. And I also really like how they're expanding on the ideas and the world that we saw in the original. And that's not just in Vegetable Valley. We look at Grape Garden, and there's a similar thing going on where it's expanding on the ideas that Bubbly Cloud established. We're traveling through the clouds, and now it's not just one palace, but now there's a tower too, and we're going through all these different kinds of structures that are littered throughout the sky. That's not to say that Kirby's Adventure doesn't bring its own new ideas though, because in Grape Garden there's a completely unique kind of stage where there's a huge fleet of airships that we're traveling through, and stuff like this is all throughout the game too, where they're completely new ideas, but they complement what was established before. And it does a really amazing job at making Kirby's world feel connected. It doesn't feel completely separate from Kirby's Dreamland. It feels like it's that same world. We're just seeing more of it now that we're on more impressive hardware. I also want to talk about Orange Ocean because it does a similar thing to what Vegetable Valley and Grape Gardens does. This time, Orange Oceans is kind of like Float Islands, where it takes those ideas we've seen, you know, ships, caverns, and it makes whole stages out of them. It makes whole journeys out of them. We start off on the islands right after we come from a mountainous region, and we can see that in the background. And as we continue, we go on ships, and we are just exploring everything that the ship has to offer. It's not just a small area. It's huge, and I love that. This is what I mean. We're just expanding on ideas that we saw before in the previous game, and now that we're on this newer hardware, it's like, come on, let's do it. Let's just fully take this idea to the next level. And then after these ships, we go to these glacier areas. We're progressing through Orange Ocean to get to the next area. And this is something I want to touch on too, because areas like Vegetable Valley, Grape Gardens, Orange Oceans, they aren't just those ideas. Orange Ocean isn't just an ocean. Grape Garden isn't just a cloud palace area. There are multiple different biomes and areas within these levels. Let's use my favorite example of this. Let's look at Yogurt Yard. You know, at first glance, it's just a mountainous region. But then we look closer and we realize, oh, we start on the mountain because we're descending from the clouds onto the mountain, and we're continuing to climb down this mountain up to the point in this stage where we see that we're literally falling from waterfalls to get back to that main area on the ground. And then when we go back on the ground, we go through the forest. Just there. How many biomes did we just pass through? Just in that one area. We went through the clouds, we went through the mountains, we went through a waterfall, then we went through a forest. That's 4 different kinds of biomes all taking place in one world. It's just so tasteful. You can tell that they really cared about this kind of thing. And I really appreciate it. I really appreciate how they expanded this world. My favorite part about Yogurt Yard is when we suddenly come across this castle in the middle of the forest. Again, we're expanding on that castle structure kind of idea that we saw established in Kirby's Dreamland. You know, Castle Lololo, Castle Dedede, Bubbly Clouds. They're just these kinds of structures that are just lying around. And before, I feel like you could argue that structures like these are built by minions. Castle Dedede, Castle Lololo, probably constructed by some of their minions. Bubbly Clouds is a little bit of an outlier, but I feel like you could have stretched that. But now in Kirby's Adventure, we're kind of just seeing that there are tons of these structures just lying out in the open. For what reason? We don't know. They're just here, and I find that so infinitely interesting, especially because of what I mentioned before. Dreamland is a place where there are so many natural areas, plains, deserts, islands, clouds, you know. These are natural areas, but then, you know, you could just be like walking through the forest and it's like, oh, there's a whole castle here. And one of the things I like about it too is that the Dreamlanders just don't seem to care. They're just like, oh, another place to hang out. And that is such a... That'll be its own video where we talk about the character of Dreamland. That's not really what we're talking about right now. We're just talking about the area, but it's so interesting. And they continue to expand on this in the next game, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, I just really like how they're expanding on these ideas and they're connecting them together. Where the giant ocean islands area isn't just full of islands and oceans, it's also full of forest. Grape Gardens isn't just full of palaces, there are also blimps there that are flying through the area. It's so dense. The areas are so dense, and I love them for that. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, we have Butter Building, and it's just this massive, massive tower that's just here. Of course, we see that there's life in there. There are a whole bunch of Dreamlanders just taking their time in there, chilling out, or maybe they live there. But I don't think it's a stretch to believe that none of them are responsible for building it. I think that structures like these are just here in Dreamland. Why? We don't know, and quite frankly, no one really seems to care. And that's just that Dreamland vibe. So, okay, now I'm gonna kind of explain the reason why I chose these games specifically. As you can tell, this is where Kirby was getting its footing. This is where it was establishing everything. Palace areas, islands, forests, gardens. All these ideas were started here. They started in Kirby's Dreamland, and then they were expanded upon in Kirby's Adventure, and that set the stage for what Kirby's World is. And every game after this is kind of an expansion on those ideas. Like, trust me, we'll see later, but there's the amount of different directions that different developers go when they're designing how they see Dreamland is so amazing, because they're still doing their own thing, but they managed to make it not feel out of place with what was established in these games. They still managed to make it feel like the same world, even if they're injecting a little bit of their own ideas into what this world is. So, we'll talk about that in future episodes. For now, we're going to jump on over to Kirby Superstar, because that was one of the first instances where they just really expanded the Kirby universe by doing something new and different. But at the same time, they went back and they expanded on what we already knew. So, let's get started. As we all know, Kirby Superstar has a semi-remake on Kirby's Dreamland. And what this means is that we're going to expand even more on the ideas that were established in Kirby's Dreamland. When we first expanded on this grassy plains kind of area in Adventure, we added a whole lake. Now, in Kirby Superstar, we've just upped the detail all the way up. Now we can see a little bit more of that background, and we can see that foresty area, we can see those hills, and we can see those trees. And even when we look at that mountain, we can see that there are a bunch of stars adorning it. And that's something that they also did in Kirby Superstar, where they upped that fantasy element just a little bit more, where they just added some ridiculous star iconography all over the place. And I love it because it just makes it even more fantasy-like. And even then, we look at the ground here, and now it's layered kind of like a cake, which really fits that Dreamland vibe, since so many areas are named after food. We look back at Kirby's Adventure: Orange Ocean, Vegetable Valley, Ice Cream Island, Grape Gardens, Yogurt Yard. Everything is named after a food, so it makes sense that some of these areas will look kind of food-like. Maybe not literally food, but sort of kind of looks like food. And this is expanded upon in Gourmet Race. Man, I just love how this area looks. I love it. We have that same layered cake kind of floor that we're running on, but then we look at the background and it's just, I love it. First of all those clouds, that slight pink hue to them makes them look kind of tasty, almost like it's some kind of cotton candy. Then we look far in the back and we look at these mountains, and the snow on them kind of looks like icing. I don't know, maybe that last one is just me. And then these grassy, I don't even know what to call them. These grassy things that are poking out of the clouds, they look kind of like cupcakes. As we're running and eating these foods, we look in the background and we see even more food looking structures. Even what we're running on is kind of like food. And like I said, it really adds to that Kirby universe. This area specifically isn't really given a name, but I'm assuming that it's like Cupcake Mountain or something like that. It's very food-like. Let me know what name you would give it in the comments below. As for other ideas that are expanded upon in Kirby Superstar, we have Mallow Castle and Old Tower. These are areas where it's just, again, out in the middle of nowhere, just randomly, it's like, oh, there's a huge structure here. We just leave Peanut Plains, we're just running through the grassy area, and it's like, oh, there's a castle. All right then, let's go through it. There's a mystery to it. It's like, why is this here? What exactly is this doing here? After we're going through all these natural environments, all of a sudden we're just in a palace, just randomly. It's not just a nice way to switch up the environment for the player, but it's also something for players like me to chew on after I've beaten the level and I'm looking back and thinking about it. And I love how the later Kirby games play with ideas like this. Why are these towers here? I wonder. And then there's Old Tower in Great Cave Offensive, beneath I don't even know how many feet underground. In the beginning, we go through a new kind of grassy area, which I really like. Even though it's another grassy area, it separates from the ones that we normally see, since this is deep underground, and it's kind of setting the stage that this is going to be different than what we normally see. Then we go further and we see this huge crystal area, which I love. There's so many different biomes and areas in Dreamland. But then after that, you're telling me we go through two areas that seem natural for this world, that seem naturally occurring. And then there's just like this huge massive tower just down here, just because. That's crazy. That's crazy. And I love it. I love how they're just willing to just throw random areas here. It's so good. It's so good. And if you notice, when you first play Superstar, we're open to 4 game modes: Gourmet Race, Dynablade, and Great Cave Offensive. And these are all expanding on what Dreamland is in their own different ways. And now, after we've seen all these different areas that Dreamland has to offer, after we've experienced all the wonders and joys of Dreamland, now we're facing a threat that's planning to take this all away and replace it with something that's completely different and alien. This is the first instance, or at least the first major instance, of metal and machinery in the Kirby series. The halberd feels like it was almost ripped from an entirely different game. And that's what I love about it. We're not afraid to do something that's completely new, completely different, and add it into the Kirby universe to expand it and make it feel even bigger. We can see on the halberd that there are all these kinds of weapons and guns and cannons, and we haven't seen anything like that up until this point in the series. I mean, you could count Shatso, but I mean, come on, look at him. He's adorable. He's not quite as threatening as Main Cannon 2 or Combo Cannon or whatever you want to call it. It's completely different and alien, and it clashes with what's been established. And what I really like about this adventure is how we're constantly going back and forth between the halberd back to the land that we're familiar with. When we start, we invade the halberd before it manages to launch off, and we see all this metal and machinery, and it has such a hard clash against that Flow Island styled background where we see houses and islands in the distance, and it seems so calm, but in the foreground we're pressed up against metal and we see all these cannons and weapons. And at least in comparison to what we're used to, it's scary. And as we progress further and further through the area, we see less of that Flow Island's aesthetic, almost as if the magic and wonder of Kirby's world is being lost due to the weapons and machinery and the coldness of the halberd. That being said, I love that there's still a fantasy element to the halberd. It's so advanced. You go inside the halberd and you see all this foreign looking machinery. It feels so different. And I've said this before, where Kirby's world has a bunch of weird looking stuff in it, like the Dorabons for instance, but they still feel completely normal for this world. The halberd, it not only feels weird and alien to us, but it feels weird and alien to this world. It feels like an invader, which I love. So yeah, we go through the halberd and we get blown off thanks to the huge engine, and we're set back all the way to those island areas that we saw when we were invading the ship in the beginning. And I really like this because we get to see one more time what we're fighting to protect. We're set back to an area where we should feel comfort because this is normal, but that huge ship in the distance is threatening to take all that away. And another thing I want to say is, I love that this game takes place over the evening, over the sunset. On one hand, there's a sense of beauty looking at this Flow Island's aesthetic over the sunset. On the other, there's a sense of urgency because this time won't last. And I mean that in both ways. Of course, there's sunset's not going to last. It's obviously eventually going to turn nighttime, but this beauty won't last. The beauty that we see in Kirby's world won't last because of that halberd. So we need to be urgent. We need to hurry up and stop that thing before it ruins everything that we love. And speaking of that Flow Islands aesthetic, did anyone else notice that the music here starts off with the motif of Flow Islands before going to something a little bit more urgent? Here, take a listen. Yeah, I guess this is a little sneak peek into what else I want to do, analyze Kirby music. But yeah, we'll go into that another time. For now, let's finish up with Meta Knight's Revenge. I love that they're continuing to connect ideas and locations within the Kirby series, even through its music. And you know, it doesn't stop here, right? We go through this Flow Islands-esque area, and again, it's very similar. We go through the islands, we go through the caverns, and then we go into a forest, almost as if we're going through a reverse of what we saw back in Spring Breeze. Going through Flow Islands, then back through a Green Greens-esque area and fighting Wispy Woods to hop on a Warp Star to try and catch the halberd. But then again, we're set back and reminded of the world we're trying to protect. This is another instance of interconnectivity in Kirby's world, because not only are we running through a very similar Green Greens type of area, but then we climb up a mountain, which seems to be the same mountain that we did in Dynablade's mode, which I didn't really touch on. I only touched on the Mallow Castle, but we can talk about that another time if you guys are interested. Anyway, this is another aspect that I like about Meta Knight's Revenge. We're interconnecting ideas and locations and worlds, just like how we've been doing in Kirby's Adventure. And now that we're back on the halberd, we get to see all of it, front and back and even inside. And banter from the Meta Knights aside, it feels cold, unwelcoming. and it's such a juxtaposition from what we saw earlier in the mode and what we saw from the rest of the game. I also want to touch on the generator fight. We see these wheelies running back and forth in these small tight areas, and from what I understand they're powering the generator here. And it's so anti-Dreamland. It's not really the fact that they're working, it's more so that it looks like they're being forced to. We look at characters like Dedede and he has minions, but they also seem like his friends. But in this instance, it almost feels as if they're being caged up and forced to do this, which again is so anti-Dreamland. And that's where I'm going to leave off for now. I'll continue talking about Superstar and Milky Way Wishes some other time in the future. Since it's not directly Popstar related, I kind of want to touch on it when I'm talking about the other planets in Kirby's universe. By the way, I was not expecting this video to be as long as it was, but well, here we are. I hope I made it worth your while. If you think this style of video is a good fit for the channel, let me know. If you liked the video, hit the like button, of course. And as for commenting, let me know what area of Kirby's world is your favorite. Or let me know what example of transition in Kirby stages is your favorite. Like for me, I really liked Yogurt Yard and how we're going from the clouds to the mountains to the waterfalls to the forest to the palace. I adore it. And y'all know that I read every comment because I put a heart on every comment in my last video. Seriously, that positive reception it made my day. So I'm looking forward to the comments on this video. Hope y'all have a good day. This has been Star Warper. See y'all next time.